One way to interpret our political dysfunction is that in the advanced economies of the world, the United States and Europe, that the middle classes have been hit by a series of economic shocks in the last 2 or 3 decades. The effects of globalization, the effects of technological change and automation, the effects of austerity, especially in Europe. And I think good, secure jobs, which were the foundation of the 3 decades of shared economic prosperity in these countries, have become increasingly scarce. So what I've talked about in my presentation about is how the industrial policies, particularly industrial policies targeting good jobs, can help repair some of those fissures in the social fabric, especially with regard to rebuilding the middle class. I emphasize that we cannot do it by emphasizing manufacturing because we cannot run history in reverse, that many of these jobs will have to be in services, and therefore effectively we need some kind of industrial policy for services like care, education, retail, and that will require us rethinking how we're doing industrial policy in the future.
I think because I'm not an economist, because I'm a historian and in some sense somebody deeply interested in politics, I think the crucial questions that are fascinating for me is who is the people and who is the we that is going to try and win back the people. And so what I'm going to try and drive the discussion towards is a reflection on how we imagine the people, how we imagine it being structured, what groups we want to speak to, disaggregate, break down, if you like, this thing, the people. And then conversely, I think, turn the gaze back on ourselves and ask who is it exactly that we feel perhaps lost the people or that the people moved away from, and ask the question, why is it that we fear this? Why is it that we feel that we have lost that relationship? Because as a historian, it's not obvious to me precisely what we're relating to. Like, when was it that we had the people? What is it? What relationship is it that we think has broken down? Those are the questions I think that somebody who comes from outside technical economics can most constructively contribute to a conversation like this.
Well, I'm a political economist that has a fascination for history of economic thought, because I really feel that the way that humanity communicates, especially in societies, and agrees on where do we want to go and how do we get there, is somewhat like the social glue that holds our cooperation together and that orientates where we're going. And this is where I think it is so important to look at what does economic thinking do to that kind of software with which we run society. And in particular, what is excluded and included when we take that lens on. And obviously, we've had a lot of analysis now that shows how the fundamental issues that are close to people's hearts, like human well-being and their health and social cohesion, or good access to education or health or housing, is not necessarily at the key or at the center of key performance indicators that we use to track progress. And that's not only on GDP, that's also when you look at definitions of productivity or value creation or which businesses are ranked as the most valuable. So how do we correct those KPIs to include the most fundamental concerns of humanity much more? Because then we have an agreement, at least, between economic numbers and narratives and actual progress ideas of people in their heads. And never to forget, I have to say that the planet, because I'm coming from that end. Human thriving will only happen if we do that within planetary boundaries, so that would be another one to really take into consideration. And that brings up yet a different challenge for loads of Keynesians that would like to print a lot of money and say we can produce even more and distribute even more. But there is a way that we have to fundamentally change how we produce in order for us to stay within those planetary boundaries. And those are the questions where I really feel that we have to be outspoken on it, say that it is uncomfortable, that it means structural change, but there's so much to gain because we have eroded a lot over the last 30 years because we have been blindfolded to those effects.
So I'm here in Berlin because I've written 2 books in the last 4 years. One called Angrynomics, which is about why people are getting angry, and looks at some of the root causes of problems in our politics today and how to address them. And the second one is called Supercharge Me, Net Zero Faster, which is about the green transition. But importantly, it's about how to make the green transition something that addresses the everyday needs and desires of the general and broader public.
Yeah, we have done quite some research on the causes and the consequences of populism, and now the research focus has shifted to potential remedies and policies that could help to counter populism. Of course, the former line of research guides the latter, so in a nutshell, we know that macroeconomic developments like globalization or technological change, migration, they have contributed to the rise of populism by increasing inequalities between people who benefit from such developments and those who don't. And this has a strong regional component as well. So due to economic development, there's regions that really thrive and prosper, and there's regions that really struggle to cope with structural change. And these very often become strongholds of populist parties. And one policy option to address this development, most obviously then, is to support the development of such lagging regions. And for the European Union, we have seen that European policy programs that do exactly that, that support lagging regions in their economic developments, that such policies help to decrease populist support. And the Forum for a New Economy commissioned a study where we now look into Bidenomics and the flagship policies in the US, like the Inflation Reduction Act or the bipartisan infrastructure law, whether they might have similar effects in the US. Right now, it seems as if this might not be the case. I mean, in the current polls, Trump is still leading Biden, but the jury will be out in November. And let's see, I'm really curious what will come out of this research.
I focused on the need for foreign direct investment in Germany because the data show that since 2016, Germany has foreign direct investment that declined by 30%. And so we have a need for foreign direct investment because it can solve two challenges that Germany faces. One is the challenge that the world has become a more risky place and we need a de-risking strategy. And a de-risking strategy, foreign direct investment is a de-risking strategy. And I explained in the conference why this is so. And the second reason we need more foreign direct investment in Germany is because Germany faces a threat, Germany and Europe faces a threat of a China shock. And the China shock means, okay, so since 2 years it is now that the Chinese export more cars and machinery to Germany than Germany exports to China. This is a turn in the trade balance within this sector. And this is very challenging because these are core sectors in Germany. So there is a threat. And what I suggest is that Germany and Europe should reverse engineer the Chinese industrial policy, which means attract foreign direct investment to Europe and ask the Chinese, for example, to produce in joint ventures, to learn quickly the new green technologies in which the Chinese are world leaders.
Well, I'm an economist by training, and I focus on European affairs. But I think economists in general tend to forget or ignore a lot of the cultural or identity dimension of the struggles we face. And so I was trying to bring during the discussions the idea that immigration and identity have been an issue in Europe for many because they are broadly misunderstood. And I think we tend to view them as problems when we're not making enough the case that immigration, in fact, is a great benefit to Europe. It's necessary for our economic growth, it's necessary for our social fabric, it's necessary for our welfare system, and I don't think we're making that clear enough to the people.
I have just about to publish next year a book on inflation called Inflation, a Guide for Users and Losers. So I'm on the inflation panel. And what I'm going to talk about is how we really don't understand as much about inflation as we think that we do. And one of the best ways to know it, again, is through people's experiences of it, which vary very much with their position in society, their position in the income distribution, etc. And taking that as the kind of data that we should listen to, rather than our own sort of supposedly objective measures of the CPI, etc., is probably a good idea.
So I'm speaking in a session on what Europe can learn from the US IRA on climate in particular. And of course, Europe has a long tradition in climate policy. Germany has a long tradition in climate policy. And a lot of this has been very successful and strong. And a core element is that of carbon pricing, of course, but also important regulation to complement that. Renewable support, efficiency support. We need to keep that in place. But there are also a couple of additional elements that we can learn from the US IRA. And I think one very important one is the narrative. Climate policy is an opportunity. It is an investment for economic development in the first place. In Europe, we talk about it far too often as a burden. And yes, it does come with a cost. It's an investment. But let's not forget that the bigger picture is one of economic development and various other opportunities that come with it. But of course, an investment means also, yes, there is a cost to it. And we need to be honest about that. We need to acknowledge that. And I think that leads over to the second point, and that is, alongside regulation, there is a role to play for finance. Of course, leveraging private finance, but also public finance to bridge the gap and to make the transition affordable and accessible, both for industries, but also for people.